Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. It's that time of week again, everybody's favorite segment, the power rankings. Trade deadline in full swing. I did a video this week going over every team in the MLB. Is your team a buyer? Is it a seller? I went through some players that are available, etc. for that. So if you haven't seen that, check that out. We're also making some progress on the subscriber giveaway. We made about 30 subscribers last week. That's awesome. We're about 90 away from the first giveaway. We have to hit 750 subs by the end of August, and I'll be giving away a hat to one of the subscribers. So if you are not a subscriber, smash that subscribe button. And if you are a subscriber, you can help get this video to more people by liking, commenting, let me know what you agree with on the power rankings, what you don't agree with. That's one way to help bring guys in so we can get these giveaways going. But other than that, guys, I'm going to jump right into it. It's a little bit of a shuffle this week. A lot of teams making some changes, of course, with the trade deadline. I'll talk about some of that in here. And excitingly, the bottom row is a little bit different than normal. And we start things off with number 30. We got the Colorado Rockies. 1-2 against Washington. 1-2 against Oakland. Haven't made a big trade yet. Kind of expecting them to make some trades leading up to Tuesday. But so far, nothing. So right now, I have them as the biggest losers on the board. Losing to two teams, as we know, that are bottom row, Oakland and Washington this week. There's just nothing going for this team, and they're in a division where I think they're furthest behind out of all the rest of the bottom row that we're going to get into. So number 29, I did move them up a spot, I guess. 1-2 against Cleveland. And then they swept Minnesota, just playing complete spoiler. We saw them trade off a couple of relief pitchers, maybe as some depth guys for other teams. But the Royals, they're trying to rebuild, and they've been trying to rebuild for what feels like almost a decade. Realistically, you could maybe make them better in Oakland, but I don't think so, because right now I have number 28 as someone completely different. The Chicago White Sox, they went 0-2 against the Cubs early in the week. We saw them trade off the likes of Lance Lynn, Giolito's gone. We're maybe expecting to see some of the bats move over the next few days, and I think as they clear out, they're going to be worse than Oakland. They're going to be pretty much in neck of the bottom of the league, although we've had them in the bottom of the power ranking row for quite some time. I think they just got even worse, of course, getting rid of some of their best players. It's only a matter of time. Pretty much got Dylan Cease, maybe. If he moves out, we could see them being the worst team on here. But right now we got three bottom teams, and that leaves Oakland, number 27. Complete surprise, really. They went 0-2 against San Fran. San Fran's a top team, of course. But then Oakland, they beat the Rockies. And I've talked about this maybe a couple weeks in a row now. Oakland's kind of sat around 29, 30 all season long, mostly 30, a couple of weeks at 29. This is, I think, the highest they've been. They might have been higher the first week of the season. I don't remember where they were. But I think Oakland has not been an easy out now for almost a month. They've been stealing wins off most top teams, too, along the way. As much as they're a AAA team, the roster seems to be playing pretty hard, and they're picking up wins. And I would bet money on them beating some of these lower teams, at least in the series, and we saw it this week, like against Colorado. Next up, still in the bottom row, we got the Washington Nationals, 2-1 against Colorado. So Washington seems to do really well against worse teams. They have a lot of trouble against the better teams. They went 1-3 against the New York Mets, who have gone into sell mode too. So Washington's very clearly the worst team in the National League East. Got a long way to go. But yeah, they're working their way up. Let's say that. Next up, Pittsburgh Pirates, 2-1 against San Diego, 2-1 against Philadelphia. So I think this is the first winning week we saw for the Pirates in a long time, it feels like. Winning back-to-back series, a lot of credit there. Sure, maybe I could move them out of the bottom row, but 1 week of this, I'm not ready to buy back in that this team is starting to turn the corner back to what we saw earlier in the season. I still think clearly the worst team in the NL Central. They're no shot at the playoffs or anything like that. And I do have some concerns about the future. As much as we got excited about the future early in the season, it's a little bit concerning right now with them at number 25. Next up, number 24. I guess the one team that the Pittsburgh Pirates might be able to compete with in their division is the St. Louis Cardinals. I talked about it last week. If the Cardinals had a good week, they played some tough opponents that they in a fight with for the playoffs. We might see a different story of them. They started the week off, got a little excited, 2-1 against Arizona. Then we started seeing some trades coming in. Of course, they got rid of Montgomery, and then we saw them trade Hicks today. So I think the give up is in now, especially because they went 1-3 against the Cubs over the weekend. I think this was the deciding factor. They needed to go like 3-1 against the Cubs to still keep in the hunt, hop over the Cubs, stay in the hunt. I think they threw in the towel this weekend, and we saw that with some of the trades. Expect O'Neill to go next for that team. Number 23, we got the New York Mets. 1-1 against the Yankees, 3-1 against Washington, winning week, but of course we saw them sell. Scherzer off, David Robertson off. The Mets pretty much throwing in the towel on the season. A lot of people talking Verlander might be going. I don't see it. I think they're going to really use Verlander as that staple to kind of build around for next year. Of course, he's getting older in age, but he still seems to be pitching lights out. So I think they're going to use him next year. I don't expect him to trade, but sure enough, if they do, they could be a bottom row kind of team. But I think that for the most part, these next one included, they're pretty much set in stone. Detroit Tigers, 0-3 against the Angels, 1-2 against Miami. Just kind of slowly going off into the sunset, these Detroit Tigers are. Never really got super going. There was that one tiny point in the season where we saw some sign of life. I think they were maybe at one point like 3 or 4 games out of the division lead. Not saying much considering it's the Central, but they're clearly out of it. And I don't really see too much going out or in for Detroit at this trade deadline. Might see a couple pieces move, but it's not going to make too much of a difference in the overall standings of the season. Number 21, San Diego Padres, 1-2 against Pittsburgh. So as much as I talk about them always having a shot in the playoffs, the early series in the week really hurt their chances in my books. But did they bounce back this weekend, sweeping the Texas Rangers? Just massive. I don't expect the Padres to really sell anyone. And if some people are saying they're going to sell at the deadline, I don't see it. They're really, like 5 games, 4.5 games out of the last wild card spot. Very much up for grabs. Their payroll is up there high too. So really, they're gonna roll the dice. I think they're gonna run with it, and they have the roster. Could go on a run here. Really haven't looked too much into depth what the rest of their schedule is like. It's one of those interesting seasons where some teams have tougher schedules early, and we're seeing them have easier schedules late, and it's making a big difference. We'll talk about that. But one specific team coming up. But the Padres, this is where we start to talk, maybe you have a shot, but it's a long shot. Next up, 20, dropping a ton of spots. I don't even know where I had them going into this week, but it's 1-2 against St. Louis, 1-2 against Seattle. Just against teams that you got to beat if you're going to be a playoff team. Arizona showed signs that they wanted to be a playoff team earlier in the season. We saw them fighting for the division lead. We saw them in the playoff hunt. I think even when I did the playoff prediction video a month and a half ago, I did have them in a playoff spot, but now I'm not believing it. I should have kind of stuck to my guns, and their depth just isn't enough to get them in the playoffs. You see all these other teams that they were fighting with before, they're making big moves, they're adding to their teams. Arizona, you're not really going to see them make any moves to bolster their lineup too much. You might see a off the scrap heap kind of pick up like Greinke or something like that to their rotation. But if they're going to sneak in, they're going to have to go on a little bit of a win streak here. Speaking of win streaks, number 19, we got the Chicago Cubs. Start the week up 2-0 against the White Sox. A nice little series there, hometown. And then they beat St. Louis 3-1. I think it was 8 games or 9-game win streak that they did this one on. Everybody was talking about how the Cubs were like number 1 sellers coming into the trade deadline. Stroman was already traded to like 6 different teams. Bellinger was traded. But at this point, the Cubs now find themselves in a very interesting spot, a hot team in a division that's not super great. Of course, they still even have a shot at the wild card. Number 19 is not too far out of that. I don't know if I'm going to see anyone come from the Cubs. We might even see them add a little bit. Who knows? This team is potentially the strongest in the division. It just hasn't shown up in terms of wins. If we look at certain statistics like run differential, they're by far the strongest in that division. So keep your eye on the Cubs. They're a long shot, but I still think they have a good shot. Number 18, this is just wild to me. We got the Minnesota Twins, 1-2 against Seattle, 0-3 against Kansas City. Can't say this enough. I say this like every month, every week. It seems like the Twins are just a disappointment. This division is a complete disappointment. We're going to see it here in this next one too. I'm just going to put them up too. We got Cleveland. This is the lowest, I think, ever that we've had a division lead on the power rankings. One of these teams is making the playoffs, which is kind of a disgrace considering how exciting this playoff race is, but that's why you have the divisions. And I guess it doesn't matter as much as it used to because you don't play as many games, but Yeah, Cleveland themselves, they went 2-2 against the White Sox this past weekend. That is not what it's going to take. Like, it's like both these teams don't want to win the division, and unfortunately, they're going to take a spot from this stacked American League. So there's a ton of teams, we're going to talk about it going forward here, a ton of American League teams that are going to be fighting for 5 spots because one of these 17, 18s are going to take it from the rest of them. Next up, we got the Miami Marlins, 1-1 against Houston, 2-1 against Detroit. A little bit of a recovery from that rough stretch they've had over the past number of weeks. We saw them try to make a move, nothing too crazy, but they're trying to add to at the deadline here. And they're in the thick of it. They're right there in the playoff run. Or 8 now. If you take a look at my power rankings, I don't necessarily think they're going to squeeze into the playoffs. However, they're in there, and I am not as hard on them as I once was, but maybe not as optimistic as I was for maybe 1 week there. Number 15, we got the Seattle Mariners, 2-1 against Miami, 2-1 against Arizona. A great week for Seattle. We like to see it. Seattle's been in the second bottom row like all season long. They just couldn't get anything going. And I said it last week, they had a pretty good week, beating Toronto in the weekend when they came in there, and now they've won, might be 4 series, might even be 5 in a row here, at least 3 series in a row. But Seattle getting hot at the right time in a division where you have the Angels, who we'll talk about in a second, and the Astros, who are both kind of struggling with injuries specifically. Number 14, we got the Philadelphia Phillies, 2-1 against Baltimore, 1-2 against Pittsburgh. 500 week, and just an average week, but the Phillies just maintaining a position to fight. And that's all you need from this team. They did win the National League last year. They do have the roster. I do kind of expect them to make it into the playoffs, but right now they're just not performing. And we saw it this weekend with Pittsburgh. They got to be able to win these series, especially against teams like Pittsburgh. 13. Got the LA Angels, 3-0 against Detroit. Everyone is getting hyped. They bring in Giolito. And then they go into Toronto there, or I guess Toronto goes into them. But no, they went to Toronto. But anyway, they didn't win the series. Today they managed to steal and didn't get swept. They won the game today in extra innings. But there is still concern there without Mike Trout in the lineup. The offense is definitely not showing up, and we saw, I think it was Saturday, where Taylor Ward, their cleanup guy, takes a ball to the face. Didn't see what the result was from that, but I know he's going to be missing some time. So a lot of concern there. Maybe the Angels aren't done yet. We still have 2 days to figure out, are they going to add at all? Number 12, we got the New York Yankees, 1-1 against the Mets. 1-1 against Baltimore, of course, as everybody that watches this knows. I do this before this Sunday night game, so they're just about to tee off with a rubber match with Baltimore. Be a big win. New York needs to get some momentum going because one team in this American League East is going to miss the playoffs, and all of them are in the top 12 of the entire MLB, in my opinion. So realistically, right now, it's the Yankees, who I think are the odd man out. But you never know. Like, this division's wide open. The Yankees are a good enough team. They could go on a little bit of a run here. Keep your eye. They can start it tonight for sure. Number 11, Cincinnati Reds, 1-2 against Milwaukee. I don't know what it is. The Reds are like the hottest team in the MLB, but they just cannot beat the Brewers, and that could end up being their downfall. They luckily had a big bounce back weekend against the Dodgers, 2-1 there. But gotta be concerned about this Milwaukee team. When they play a team like Milwaukee, team with good pitching, gotta be concerned that if they do make it into the playoffs, they don't necessarily have what it takes to get past the first round, because pitching is what you're gonna run into, especially from any of these top teams. So that is a concern for Cincinnati. But rightfully so, they're in the second row, and I don't think there's any doubt amongst everyone else. That brings us number 10. We do have those Milwaukee Brewers, 2-1 against Cincy. I talked about it. And then 0-3 against Atlanta. So I guess they threw everything they had at the Reds, rightfully so, but the offense just isn't there. I think we saw them today. Was it today? Carlos Santana coming in, hopefully boosting that. Maybe a little bit of an address at first base. Clearly one of the issues in Milwaukee. But they got to do something else, because Carlos Santana's not your answer on offense. Mind you, they're still trying to get in the playoffs. And I think 2 teams might get in, but with these 2 teams fighting hard against each other, let's not forget how close these Cubs are behind them. The Cubs are playing pretty hot, so you got to be careful. Number 9, we got the Houston Astros, 2-1 against Texas, 1-2 against Tampa. 500 a week against two teams that are ahead of them, so that's something to be happy about. I do expect Houston to continue to make some moves. They brought in some relief help with Kendall Graveman. Maybe we'll see another bullpen guy. They probably want to bring in a starting pitcher too, right? A lot of moves happening, and it's going to be a fight to see who can get whatever's left on the market. Houston has to respond because we saw Texas making big moves, and we'll talk about that when we get to them. Number 8, lowest so far this season. 1-1 against Miami, 2-1 against Houston. A winning week, but like only a 5-game week, so not too much to go there. But Tampa, I just think overall, don't know what they're going to do at the trade deadline here. They got to do something, I think, if they're going to keep fighting. And right now, I guess they're making up a little bit of ground on Baltimore in the division. 1 game back now, I believe. But they've lost their touch. Maybe from here, we will see a little bit of heat from them, but right now, I'm not counting too much on it. Number 7, we got the Boston Red Sox, 2-1 or 2-0 against Atlanta. So they had a 2-game set with Atlanta, swept it, and then they went into San Fran and they lost that series 2-1. But I watched most of the end of the game today, where the rubber match was 1-1. Both these teams played very well. They're very closely matched. Maybe San Fran had a little bit of the home field advantage working in their favor. They went to the 11th inning in this one. Boston just needs to find some offense. I expect them to make some moves as part of why I have them as high as I do. I understand if you look at the grand scheme of standings, maybe not, but they've been one of the hottest teams over the past 2 months. And that's one team I wanted to highlight. They do have one of the easier schedules, at least over the next few weeks. They're going to be playing Detroit. They're going to be playing Kansas City. They're going to be playing Washington. So, like, Boston might have been one of those teams that we judged early having a tougher schedule, playing the harder teams, and now they're going to start to reap the rewards. And they're right there on that border for that playoff spot. Number 6, had to move them up. They just had a solid week this week. 2-0 against Oakland, 2-1 against Boston. So a 4-1 week for San Fran. Was concerned they went on that, it was like a 12-game stretch where they had a rough spout of it, but it looks like they're coming out the other side. And they're matching up well against these teams. So I think out of all the teams we've talked about so far, they're in the strongest position to really make it into the playoffs. I don't know if the division is really up for grabs for them, but I do think that of all the teams we've talked about so far, the playoffs is most optimal coming to them. Number 5, I feel kind of dirty putting them here, but they're playing good. They're a good team, and they made a big addition with Hicks today to just really address the biggest issue I've had with them all year, and that's their bullpen and not being able to finish out games. They went 2-1 against the Dodgers, 2-1 against the Angels, so 4-2 against both LA teams. You got to be really excited about that. The big question is going to be this week. The Toronto Blue Jays are playing Baltimore. Don't know if it starts tomorrow, it might be Tuesday, but that's going to be a massive series between the two teams. Excited to watch it, but Toronto is very capable of moving even further up this. I think they're a strong enough team. Number 4, we got the Texas Rangers. So they're number 4, and they had an awful week. They haven't had the greatest number of weeks, but do give them a little bit of boost because we all know where their issues were, and they really addressed them. Bringing in Montgomery today, they brought in Max Scherzer the other day, so just really addressing the pitching. I do think they might even add another reliever. We saw them bring in Chapman earlier too. Just wild. This team is starting to gear up. I think they see that this division is theirs as long as they really grasp it, and I think they're doing that. So that's part of why the spread here. Even though they've been losing to Houston, those games have been wild. A lot of it has been the pitching. I think Texas addressing it there is a big deal. So I am keeping them there. We'll see how it goes because, like, realistically, I think from like 9 up, these are very interchangeable. One massive week for one team, and you're moving up into 4th, maybe even 3rd, 2nd. Number 3, at the Baltimore Orioles. I'm waiting. I'm not going to address them yet, but if they got to do something still. 1-2 against Philly to start the week. 1-1 against the Yankees. Maybe they'll win today and it'll be a 500 week. But we haven't seen what they're going to do at the trade deadline yet, and that is going to be a big part of whether they can hold on to this 3rd spot, in my opinion. Toronto and them match up next week. Toronto's made their move. I don't know if Toronto's going to make another move. Baltimore's going to possibly make a move, but it's not going to be in time for the Toronto series, so that could have some impact. Toronto's, 4 games behind the Orioles for the division lead. It's not out of the question that Toronto can go on a run here. Orioles are holding on to this one, in my opinion, very closely, but I'm excited to see what this next week is like for them. Number 2, Dodgers 1-2 against Toronto, 1-2 against Cincinnati. Another one of those situations where, sure, they didn't have a winning week. These 3 teams necessarily didn't have the greatest of weeks, but as we know, we've been doing these power rankings every week all season long. These 3 teams have had a lot more consistency than the rest of the teams that we're talking about. Toronto specifically, not been super consistent. We've seen Toronto as low as 15. We've seen San Fran, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure we saw San Fran in 25 at one point. Boston, same kind of story. So other than Tampa, the rest of these teams have been super consistent, so they're kind of holding on to these spots. I'm interested how this trade deadline is going to affect them. Dodgers, of course, making moves to address their issues. They bring in the right-handed bats. They bring in Lance Lynn for a little bit more depth. They're doing what I've been expecting them to do. So that's kind of why they've been so strong on my rankings for so long. And same with this team. Number 1, no question about it at this point. Atlanta Braves just holding on to this number 1 spot. I don't really think they're going to let go of it. We'd have to see some atrocious injuries, losing streak, etc. They got the division on lock. They're pretty much gearing up for the postseason. Don't expect them to do much at the trade deadline either. But there you guys have it. The power rankings leading 2 days before the trade deadline. A couple of teams might make some moves. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Subscribe to the channel. Join the community, Discord, etc., etc. We will see you out there for that next video.